Hello everyone, and welcome to our second webinar called Gardening Basics and School Garden Guide. Today we will be covering, like the title says, a few different gardening tips for your school garden, as well as one of our main resources that we provide, the School Garden Guide. My name is Liza Sternick, and I work at Healthy Planet. I'm the Healthy Growing Coordinator here. And I'm also your point of contact. So if during or after this video you have questions or comments, feel free to email me. I'm available all hours of the day, and I'd love to receive your questions and try and find answers to them. I've been farming for 3 years now. I'm going on to my 3rd year of co-owning a farming business up in Freestone. And so I have quite a bit of experience with gardening and farming. And since we have kind of a small farm, we usually call it a garden, although to most people who only do gardening in, say, boxes or raised beds, it's definitely a big operation. Today, Arian will be the moderator for this, so if you have any sort of technical questions, feel free to ask them in the chat box, and she will make sure to answer those. Also, if you have any general questions throughout the presentation, you can also type them in the chat box, and we'll answer them during our Q&A section. So we're going to go over a few different things today. The essentials of good gardening, and here we'll cover treating the soil, propagation, care while growing, beneficial insects, and harvesting your garden. And the second section of this webinar is the School Garden Guide. So let's get to it. Treating the soil. And this is a quote that I really liked by Margaret Atwood. In the spring, at the end of the day, you should smell like dirt. And this is definitely true while farming, since there's so much work to be done in the springtime. It's your busiest season. But also in the school garden as well. There's a lot of planting, a lot of work to be done for the garden beds. So just keep that in mind when you're working with your kids, and don't shy away from them getting dirty. So the first point is that good soil is the basis of all gardening. And this really means that good soil equals good food. Small-scale organic farming really benefits the soil by fostering a healthy soil environment for microorganisms, for worms, insects, and of course for plants. On a large scale, agricultural production really just adds artificial nutrients and minerals that can be deposited into the soil, but go directly towards the plant and don't actually benefit the soil environment or the health of the earth on a greater scale. What is soil? So this is an example of a soil profile, and there are multiple layers of soil called different soil horizons. The majority of edible plants grow in the A horizon, or topsoil, and you can see here there's the O horizon, which is the surface litter. This consists of leaves, of sticks, of recent plant matter that's fallen to the ground. And as I mentioned before, the topsoil is where the majority of edible plants grow. And then the bottom layers of soil kind of go down, and you finally get to bedrock, which is actual rock, no soil there. The 3 main components of topsoil are clay, which has the smallest particles, silt, which is kind of in the middle, and sand, which have the largest particles. And vegetables grow best in soil with less than 20% clay. So the question is, how do you change your soil? Well, whether you have soil which is high in clay or high in sand, really the best way to change your soil is by adding compost and by mulching. Compost adds beneficial nutrients to the soil and also supports microorganisms and microbes, whereas mulch retains moisture as well as heat and also suppresses weeds. What is compost? Compost is decomposed organic matter. It's a natural process of recycling organic material such as leaves and vegetable scraps into a rich soil amendment, which gardeners fondly refer to as black gold. And fertilizer, as I mentioned before, feeds the plants, while compost actually feeds the soil food web. So this leads us to the soil food web. And this is a key to fertile soil. Plants are the producers. They use the sun's energy to convert water and carbon dioxide into plant material via photosynthesis. And the primary consumers, or decomposers, are mainly fungi and bacteria. They digest fallen leaves and other organic matter. The secondary consumers are other organisms such as mites, protozoa, and they feed on the fungi and bacteria and release nutrients that can then be absorbed directly by plants. And their undigested remains become part of the organic soil matter. The high level of consumers, such as earthworms and ants, feed on the secondary consumers, and their fecal pellets become part of the soil. So they also release nutrients that spur plant growth. Propagation. Propagation is the process of creating new plants. And this could be through planting seeds, through transplanting plant sections, through taking cuttings from fruit trees to graft onto other trees, by saving seeds, etc. Starting seeds outdoors versus indoors is definitely a discussion we have a lot in the school garden. When you start seeds indoors, they are protected, they're sheltered, but they also don't get a lot of sunlight, which is a big thing for seedlings. When you start them outdoors, they're out in the elements, they're exposed to different critters, different animals, as well as to the weather, and so they might not germinate as well. So this is something you really have to figure out depending on your location. If you have a great sunny spot next to a window where you can germinate your seeds, I'd recommend doing that. Some seeds don't need to be started before they're planted directly in the garden. So make sure to research which seeds you're planting and what's the best technique to propagate them. Hardening off. Hardening off starts means to put your smaller plants outside before planting them in garden beds to toughen them up and make the transition for them easier. So if you have started little plants on your windowsill with your classroom, if you put them outside in that same container before planting them, they'll have a chance to get used to the different temperature, the different weather that's outside, and they'll have a better time adapting to it. So next we're going to look at how to practice seed-saving document. And this is a great organization called seedmatters.org, and they have a few different main points, or main goals, I should say. The first is to conserve crop genetic diversity. The second is to promote farmers' roles and rights as seed innovators and stewards. And the third is to reinvigorate public seed research and education. And as you can see on the right, they have a number of different useful resources for school gardens and for gardening in general. Their seed-saving chart shows a variety of different fruits and vegetables that you can save the seeds of and the different conditions that are necessary to save their seeds. They also have 6 tips for saving seeds, but what we recommend is to start small. So to start with beans, peas, and tomatoes. These are the easiest thing to save the seeds of, and you can plant them in close proximity with other plants, and they won't have that much of a problem with cross-pollination. There's an additional resource we show down below, which is called From Generation to Generation, and this is an activity book for seed saving that could be used with your students out in the garden as well. The next section is Care While Growing. And this is a great Shakespeare quote, "The chamomile, the more it is trodden on, the faster it grows." And here I'm not recommending your students to go and tramp around in the garden and step on all the flowers and the vegetables, but it kind of shows that the more attention you pay to the garden, even if it is kind of stepping on it and wandering around in it, the better it will do. So the first tip is to make sure your plants are never thirsty, and the key to watering is to water deeply, less frequently, rather than a shallow water every day or every other day. Watering plants, it's really important to water plants at their roots rather than on their leaves, because if you water plants on their leaves, they could cause a lot of problems. The sun reflects on them and the leaves end up burning, and also they don't get as much water in general. To cultivate means to nurture and to help grow, and on the farm this usually refers to weeding. But keeping weeds out of the garden is very important. This will help not only your vegetables and fruit plants grow big, but also allow them to outcompete other plants. It's good to work with the soil by adding compost and organic fertilizer when needed, and this I cannot stress enough. Using compost and using organic fertilizer in your soil will add so many benefits, and if you do it year after year, then your soil will stay fertile and you'll be able to produce the amount of food that you want to in the end. Mulching helps retain moisture, heat, and helps suppress weeds as well. And it's a thin layer of material applied to an area of soil. And this material could be wood chips, could be straw, bark, or even cardboard. You can use all of those as mulch. Pruning and trimming your garden plants can be important. In a school garden, you don't have to do a lot of pruning. If you have fruit trees, you'll definitely have to do a bit more, but I would recommend contacting us prior. Usually when you prune fruit trees, you prune them in the winter time, and it can be difficult to prune a fruit tree if you have never done it before. So if you're curious, you have questions, please contact us. We'd love to answer them and help you get on your way pruning your fruit trees. The other plant you can prune are tomatoes. They kind of get all crazy and wild and spread around, and so if you like them to be more uniform, then you can prune them. Honestly, I like to see how big my tomato plants can grow, so I would just recommend letting them go crazy and giving them the environment they need to really get big and luscious, and the kind of tomato plants where you can crawl inside them and make a little tomato fort. Rotation planting can help save space, and rotation planting is something to think about a year or so into your garden. Rotation planting means you're constantly rotating your crops while making sure to use cover crops and compost when needed. You see a lot of rotation planting in small gardens and in small-scale organic farms that run year-round. Right now, on my farm, we are doing rotation planting. Partially, this is to continue production of certain crops throughout the selling season. So we plant cabbage every couple months, and then we have cabbage when we need it, when we're selling it at our farm stand. We also plant cover crop in the winter and don't plant any other vegetable crops, just to amend the soil, help the soil, and help the land become more fertile. So at this point, I'd like to show you the basics of gardening video we've created called Weeding Your Garden. And this will also be available on our YouTube page, and we'll put the link to that in the chat box. Weeding your garden bed. Step 1 is to remove weeds and refuse regularly. Make sure to check your garden bed regularly for weeds and other trash that might accumulate there. Pull out the weeds from the base of the root and collect them in your hand. This is an example of the weeds that you can collect after just a few minutes of weeding, and a few different pieces of trash that were also in the garden bed. Step 2. Dispose of refuse in an appropriate place. Make sure to put your weeds in either your compost pile or your green compost bin. Make sure to dispose of the trash in a trash bin. Great job, you're done. Okay, so I know that was really short, and for those of you who've had gardens before, it's pretty self-explanatory. You probably already know how to weed, but and this also might have been a little glitchy for you, the video, so make sure to check it out on our YouTube page. It's very smooth there and looks good, so you can also look at our other videos there as well. Okay, let's move on to beneficial insects. And instead of focusing on pests, I wanted to focus on beneficial insects. There are so many pests in the garden. You can go from the very big, like deer or, gophers, things like that, to small insects, aphids, things that do a lot of damage to plants. But instead, I'd like to focus on beneficial insects because they are what we want to promote in the garden. When you're doing organic gardening or organic farming, a lot of what you do is to promote these beneficial insects through, like I was saying, support the soil food web, and really encourage those different critters to come into your space and start to munch on aphids or start to scare away the gophers. Whatever they do their job well. So let's look at a few of the beneficial insects that are natural enemies of garden pests. One that everyone knows and loves and recognizes is the lady beetle or the ladybug. And lady beetles eat aphids, which are a common garden pest and which can really destroy some plants. These insects, most of these beneficial insects, can be encouraged to come into your garden by promoting a diversity of flowering plants. They really thrive off of these sorts of native, maybe even perennial plants that will flower and continue to flower year-round or a few times a year. So that's definitely a way to promote these beneficial insects, but you can see others such as the predatory wasp or, of course, spiders. But there are definitely a lot of critters that you want to encourage to be in your garden. Next is harvesting your garden. And when to harvest what? This is a great question that we get a lot of times. This really depends, obviously, on what you're planting and when you want to harvest. We recommend doing a harvest day at the end of your growing season. So say you're taking a break for summer, if you do a harvest day before school ends in May or June, then you'll have an opportunity to really clear out the garden and gather what you need to make a feast before you get out of school. Another resource to look at when you want to know when to harvest what is the growing guide, which has the length of time it takes until plants are ready to be harvested. So that's pretty simple. If you mark down the date of when you've planted certain things, you can then estimate from there when you'll be harvesting them. So how much to harvest? Daily, weekly, the entire plant? And this obviously depends on what you're planting, but this again you can find resources in the school garden guide as well as many resources online. So in terms of harvesting the garden, crop rotation could play an important role in this after you've harvested. And at that point, if it's during summer, for example, you could plant a cover crop, and that would require very little maintenance. Or you could plant more fruits and vegetables that are semi-drought tolerant and have those grow throughout the summertime. So what to know about eating your garden produce? There are really only 3 things you need to know. Pick it, wash it, and eat it. And kids really love the first and the last of these. They love to pick it and they love to eat it, but a lot of the times they aren't really encouraged to wash it, which is an important step in the school garden process, not only for sanitary reasons, but just out of habit. If they do buy non-organic fruits and vegetables, it's really important to wash them before eating them. So hopefully you have an organic garden, and I'm sure that those vegetables would be fine if you didn't wash them, but it'd be even better if you did. So definitely encourage your students to do that. So the summer garden prep, and this I mentioned a few different times, but there are five recommendations we have for preparing your garden for summer. The the first one, or the fifth one, the one we recommend the least, I guess, is to put your beds to sleep, which means that you don't really have any involvement in your garden for the entire summer. And this involves covering the garden beds with a layer of cardboard and then mulching over it, so putting wood chips or some other type of mulch over that garden bed. And this will not only suppress the weeds, but it will also retain the moisture, and the cardboard will start to decompose, and this will increase the fertility of your soil. So instead of just leaving your soil out to the elements to be dried out and die a bit on the top layer, you're really trying to retain that moisture and keep the microorganisms and microbes in the soil alive and thriving. So the fourth thing for the summer garden prep is to plant Seminole pumpkin squash. And these are a great squash to plant. They grow very quickly, and they, depending on your area, they can get really big and luscious, or they can stay pretty small. But the nice thing about planting something like this is you can plant it before school gets out, and then when you get back from the summer, you might have a squash or two that you can share with your students, and that is always really fun. So the third summer garden prep tip is to enrich the soil. And I know I've mentioned this numerous times before, but add compost. Really, it's so worth it. It makes your soil happy. You can almost see the smile on the dirt's face when you add compost. It's such a living organism, and you really need to treat it like that and feed it with this great resource. There are other things you can add as well, other soil amendments, such as ground oyster shell powder. You can add seaweed. You can add other different concentrations of things like fish manure or chicken or horse or cow manure. But I would add manure on if it's in a small scale garden, I would only add a little bit of it to each bed, because that can be really strong. So the second summer garden prep tip is to grow peas. And peas are something that are really fun. They don't need a lot of water, but they also are super tasty. And if you don't get to them when they're still sweet and the pea isn't that big, you can always harvest them when they've gone through the maturity of the fruit of the pea, and there are seeds there, and you can collect the seeds and boil some peas. So that can be really fun for students to have peas, since a lot of the times the only way you get peas is in a bag from the frozen section in the supermarket. And the number one tip for summer garden prep is to plant beans. And I know this sounds similar to peas, but it's very different. Beans can thrive with little water, and they also add nutrients to the soil. They're nitrogen fixers, which means they bring nitrogen and they put it down through into their roots and make little nitrogen nodules that they drop down into the soil. The most important thing, I guess, if you are using beans as a soil additive, is to harvest them or pull them out of the ground before they've produced pods. If they produce bean pods, then they've drawn that nitrogen back up into the plant to use for the beans. If you want to harvest beans, then don't worry about it. Just wait until the beans are ready. Okay, we are on to the school garden guide. Are there any questions? Okay, so let's keep going. This is a great quote from Mahatma Gandhi. He says, "To forget how to dig the earth and to tend the soil is to forget ourselves." And that really resonates within me. I'm a strong proponent of getting people, especially kids, out into nature and into the soil and into the dirt, and helping them embrace that part of their lives that you don't normally see, which is your food and where it comes from. In this section, we'll be covering a few different resources that we provide. there is the garden activity guide, the growing schedule, the garden watering frequency, the garden watering schedule, the growing guide, and the garden maintenance schedule. And I know these sound very similar, but they all serve their purpose. And if you can collect them in a binder, you can have these resources for as long as you need them. So not every document is necessary for a successful garden, but we do recommend that you take a look at these to better understand your garden and the goals of your garden team. So the first document is the Garden Activity Guide. And this guide is a one-page guide to basic garden maintenance and caretaking. This guide covers planting, harvesting, weeding, watering, and thinning. We suggest printing this out and keeping it in your garden binder or folder with other garden-related information, just as a reference point for you as you go into your gardening adventure. The growing schedule is there is a two-part schedule. There's a fall planting version and a spring planting version. And this document gives a rough seasonal timeline for when to start seeds, indoors, outdoors, and when to plant transplants. This helps to begin the garden project by having a better idea when to plant certain things in the garden. And this can either be referred to online or it can be printed out as well and put into your garden binder or folder. The garden watering frequency is the next resource that we have created for you. And this is one of the most important jobs in the school, watering your garden. Without water, the plants would either die or look very measly and produce very little food. With too much water, of course, the plants can drown or their roots can rot, and they won't be very happy. So the garden watering frequency document helps you know how often you should water different fruits, vegetables, and herbs, and gives a few tips about watering as well. The garden watering schedule can be used throughout the school year, but it's a great resource to use during summer when the school garden is left unattended for long periods of time. Here you can have parents, different members of the school community, teachers, volunteers sign up to water for a week period. And if this job is split between a few different people, it makes it a lot easier, and it doesn't make it as much of a chore to do throughout the summer. The growing guide is your personalized, location-based guide to growing different vegetables, fruits, and herbs that you want in your garden. And the growing guide has the plant type, as you can see, which is the name of the plant, planting instructions for both the spring and the fall. If a plant shouldn't be grown in the spring or in the fall, it will also say that on the planting instructions. It also has basic care information like the planting depth, the plant spacing, the days to germinate, and the days to harvest, which I mentioned before. The garden maintenance schedule is to organize different classes or teachers or parents or members of the garden team to see who's responsible for the garden at any given time. And this is organized into months. So it doesn't necessarily have to be for the whole month, but it's just to show that it would be easier for a group of people to take responsibility for a longer period of time of the garden than for a shorter period of time. And this again is not a replacement for the garden watering schedule, and that should be primarily used for the summer months and is more detailed. This should be used for the months in the school year when you're trying to separate curriculum and responsibility for the garden. Okay, with that, we've come to the end of our webinar. Are there any questions that anyone has? Questions or comments? If you would like to ask a question, feel free to send us an email or call, and that would be very welcome. We'd love to receive all of your questions. So just a reminder, if you want to learn more, you can RSVP for our third and fourth workshops. They're our last two workshops, and they're going to be presented by Crystal. The third webinar is called Edible Plant Biology, and this goes into more detail of plant biology, of what a plant needs to survive and thrive, and the process that an edible plant goes through from germination to its death. And that will be Tuesday, August 26th from 3 to 4:30 approximately. And our fourth and last webinar is our webinar all about composting. And in this webinar, you can learn about the variety of composting methods, as well as vermiculture, and a bunch of different things about soil and soil health. And this is Thursday, August 28th from 3 to 4:30 p.m. If you'd like to RSVP for either of those, you can send us an email, give us a call, however you'd like, or you can visit our website at healthyplanetus.org for more information. Thank you so much, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.